We acknowledge, celebrate and pay our respects to the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people of the Canberra region and to all First People on whose traditional lands we meet and work. Their cultures are among the oldest continuing cultures in human history. We also acknowledge and celebrate that many of the speakers in this series were based on other traditional lands and territories across Australia and the world. We recognise their past and present leaders and acknowledge their contribution to our collective past and futures. Welcome to Cybernetics Snacks, a speaker series featuring leading voices in the cybernetics conversation. We're currently exploring the past, present and future of cybernetics. Rural development, cybersystemic governance and systems education. Today, we're in conversation with Ray Ison. We've asked Ray 4 questions. Let's see what he has to say.
In 1988, actually a little before that, in 1986, I began a conversation with a very dear friend and a colleague at then Hawkesbury Agricultural College in New South Wales, in Richmond, New South Wales, west of Sydney. And that, in a way, was probably the first definitive conversation I might have had about cybernetics. David Russell, my colleague, had a background in psychology and science, and we began to talk about the failures of education and the failures of particularly research and development systems that were based on a linear model of knowledge transfer. We became interested in the processes associated with what was called rural extension. Extension was a professional field developed to extend the products of science or the products of research to pastoralists and graziers and have adoption. The famous adoption curve and the language of early adopters and laggards that had been built on a model of hybrid maize production in the US. We felt that this wasn't a particularly apt model. It didn't explain our experience, and the whole extension edifice didn't seem to be working in the agricultural domain. That led to us getting involved in a funded piece of work from what was then the Australian Wool Research and Development Corporation, who were concerned about agricultural extension. They were funding research. They didn't feel it was being taken up and used by graziers. They wanted to know why that was the case. At much the same time, David invited me to accompany him on a trip to Melbourne, where we met up and did a workshop with Umberto Maturana, Chilean neurobiologist, whose friendship and ideas and conversations have been with me ever since. And so many of Umberto's understandings have driven and informed a lot, well, just about substantially all of my thinking and practice ever since. He's not the only one, of course, but it was a very significant moment in my life when I attended that event. It followed on to us being funded by the Wool Research and Development Corporation to undertake a major research program working with pastoralists in semi-arid Australia to explore why research wasn't being adopted. And it was also a arena or a theatre in which we tested an alternative model of research and development based on the concept of enthusiasm. The word enthusiasm comes from the Greek entheos, meaning the God within. We postulated that it would be possible to build collaborations of pastoralists working together around common enthusiasms for action. And we were seeking through our research to devise means to trigger enthusiasm, foster and sustain enthusiasm. And the book in this slide, Ison and Russell 2000, and then the paperback 2007, is a exemplar of a product produced by a whole research team. It includes chapters from the pastoralists we worked with, and it presents a model of doing research in a particular way, of doing science in the Maturanan form, which is not exactly the same form that many other scientists would pursue in doing science, and I think stands as testimony to ideas that are still relevant today.
I feel like there's a very, very big journey there that's happened from neurobiology to wall R&D to enthusiasm.
Well, they have in it, underpinning it, whole questions of conversation, of how we understand human communication, and how so many metaphors of and framings of human communication are false in a biological sense. And it also deals with the notion that we are emotioning beings, and that the emotions have been, I coined the term the apartheid of the emotions. There was in the science for a long, long time, emotions weren't valid things that you could talk about. Of course, it's a bit different now, but in those days, it wasn't able to be entered into the conversation, really. And these are all cybernetic notions, because at the basis of the Maturanan understanding and the Maturanan biology is what he calls the biology of love. And the biology of love is when the other arises as a legitimate other in all of your doings. And that other can be another person, another species, or the biosphere itself. So it's about the mutual creation and unfolding of a relational dynamic, which we could choose to describe as love, but certainly not in any Hollywood sense of that word love.
Hollywood's got a lot to answer for.
Yeah.
Maybe we need a cybernetic Hollywood blockbuster. Might be a conversation for another day. Well,
Sure.
This might take us bridge us onto our second question, which relates to cybernetics past. And we've kind of started to dwell a little bit in the past there already. It's a bit of I know it's not the most ideal question, but we're interested, what's your favorite tool or approach or theory or text or person or story from cybernetics, and why?
Well, I gave some thought to this question, and it reminded me again of ideas I picked up in that very first workshop with Umberto. And he made the point that the past and the future are merely different manners of living in an ever unfolding present. So
I like it. Change the question.
And rather than a tool or technique, it seems to me that what is always the most important thing is to have an interesting question. And the interesting question I took from my work and experiences with Umberto was, what do we do when we do what we do? Of course, this involves a recursion, and there's a second order question, because it's not just about our doing, but it's about the doing of our doing. The thinking about our thinking, or the knowing about our knowing. And these are all second order processes, which Maturana's work invites us to do. And it's not merely just in second order cybernetics, of course, one of the key notions is that you admit the observer into your considerations, and that all knowing is done by an embodied being. Everything said is said by someone. These notions that unfold and become apparent when you admit an embodied practitioner into your understanding of what it is that we do when we do what we do. And this heuristic, this model in this slide that you can see, is a heuristic I developed for our teaching at the Open University about systems practice. and it's concerned with how you understand practice in systemic or cybersystemic terms. And of course, one of the great difficulties you have if you ask people to consider their practice or build a systemic model of how they do their practice, many people struggle to admit themselves as embodied practitioners into their own practice. And you immediately get a breakthrough in the ability to engage in reflexive understandings and reflexive practice if you can see yourself as a part of your own practice. So this particular model has a practitioner thinking about practice, conceptualizing practice in what we call the PFMS heuristic. The P, the practitioner, who has a tradition of understanding out of which they think and act. And that tradition of understanding is embodied in us and is only admitted through conversation and engagement with others. And we, in the moments of our doing, we may or may not do what we said we've done. Often we do what our historical body shapes us to do in the moment, and then we give a justification or a rationalization after the event. And of course, as Maturana would say, in the moment of our perception, we cannot distinguish between perception and illusion. So we live moments of perception and illusion, and it's only after the event that we can really be clear or become clearer about the difference. So this is a model of a practitioner, and it starts by appreciating that every practitioner is situated. You can never escape your situatedness of your body. We're all sitting here on a chair looking into a screen at the moment. So our body has a particular configuration, and that might be comfortable for hearing or talking or not. But if we abstract ourselves out of that situation, we can think about what the situation is. The situation is a design of a particular type of conversation undertaken by people from the Cybernetics group at ANU. And we might engage with that situation through particular framings, theories, interpretive lenses. So F stands for framework, S for situation. And we might engage with that through particular methods, tools, techniques, etc. And in our engagement with that situation, dependent on purpose, we can generate feedback from our engagement with the situation, which might be about change, might be about learning, might be about adapting frameworks or adapting methods and tools. So this is a systemic heuristic for students to begin to think about how they can embody their own practice and begin to think about how they might design learning systems for themselves and others, and to begin to see systemic change in terms of a design of a learning system that, of course, is capable of being monitored, controlled, and generating feedback. The references I've given there are to some of the Open University teaching materials, and part of this question, of course, is how you might use these. And we've used it a lot in the design of our modules at the Open University, which are, of course, are online for mature age students. And a module in the Open University context could cost anywhere from 250,000 to sometimes up to £1 million to develop, and they're very sophisticated projects in themselves. I've also devised with my colleagues, Chris Blackmore and Sri Skandaraja, a PhD program which bookends conferences for students around any particular conference, so that they can begin to ask the question, how might you incorporate systems thinking or cyber systemic thinking into your PhD research? And to begin to use this heuristic to unpack how you see your own research practice and answer the question, what do we do when we claim that we do research?
Just the small questions then.
Yes.
I mean, it certainly sounds like in terms of building learning systems, the struggle to admit ourselves as embodied practitioners is a huge challenge to be able to learn that perspective and learn that kind of reflex almost. And I wonder whether you found other things alongside this particular heuristic work, or whether this is sufficient for your students to start to engage with that kind of thinking.
Well, it's much better if you're able to run exercises and workshops with students in an embodied way. I mean, we're on a particularly technology-mediated form of communication, and that diminishes the embodied possibilities, in my view, because
Absolutely.
it constrains the body. So if you were to join the course that I'm running at the ISSS conference in Fuga National Park in June, I would take you outside and we would do a sort of exploratory journey through your life as a practitioner who's come to this moment and claims that you are now a researcher. So I would unpack that, going back through your embodied history into your evolutionary past, your childhood past, where you come into language, where you come into social and cultural aspects, and where you come into choices about the research paths that you choose to pursue.
It sounds like quite the workshop. And embodied teaching is something that bridges, I think, into the next question, which is a question that's really around practice and application of cybernetics and cybernetics present. So our third question asks you to tell us about how you've applied cybernetics or seen cybernetics applied to shape, create, or improve something in the world around us.
Okay, thanks, Amy. You'll see that I've subverted the question and I put up the term cybersystemics.
You are not the first, and you probably won't be the last. That's what questions are for.
At the Open University, where I've been now for nearly 30 years, we've been teaching systems ideas since 1970. And if you look back at our history, whilst we used to call ourselves as a systems department or a systems group, we've actually been teaching a blend of cybernetics, systems, and complexity theory. So we draw on each of these traditions. And I prefer these days to talk about cybersystemics, to acknowledge that there are two particularly prominent strands which in our work and in my own work influence what I do. These each have lineages, and they bring different things to the conversation if you understand the lineages and explore them. And it's also it's also a device to try and build relationship between groups who in the past haven't always talked to each other. So that's a political dimension. In terms of use, I would say the most, in many ways, the area of my work that's had the most profound impact is the experience of our students who've studied our programs at the Open University, and because I've been involved in the design and conduct of many what I will call modules designed as learning systems, which, even though we are teaching at a distance, are very sophisticated pedagogical designs, I would contend, and they provide profound experiences for the learner. We have a very active pedagogy, and the pedagogy is grounded in the life world of the student. So there's lots of activity and online learning and assessment that grounds the concepts in students' own situations, including the workplace. And we're just expanding into presenting a new apprenticeship in England, in which called the Systems Thinking Practitioner Apprenticeship, where these ideas will have to be used in the workplace, and they'll have to show evidence of generating certain knowledge, skills, and behaviours to progress into the apprenticeship. This is a master's level apprenticeship. The data in these slides are just some examples from a couple of our postgraduate modules in our Systems Thinking in Practice program. This was for 2 modules that ran from 2010 to 2020, and there's just over about 1,100 students successfully completed those modules in that time. And so many of these people report their experiences in these studies as life transforming. On the other hand, it also puts us in a very, well, it raises a set of ethical issues for us as educators in this field. And something that was missed for many years in the early days was that if you educate people in the systems and cybernetics traditions, you can often leave them in a space where they find the workplace or their life context is not very conducive to the ideas that systems and cybernetics raise. And you can set up people to fail, leave their work, become depressed, all those sorts of things. So there is an ethical dimension to, I think, systems and cybernetics teaching, and that is, how do you teach them to take what we've come to call the design turn, which is a second order design turn. It's not only how can you learn about systems ideas, cybernetic ideas, but how can you begin to take responsibility for changing the context or creating contexts in which those ideas can thrive, and your doing of them, your practice of them can thrive. Because you have to work hard at a conducive context to make these things viable, and for you as a practitioner to maintain your enthusiasm.
Absolutely. Having lived a little bit of that myself, I'm wondering where your course was when I needed it.
Yeah. So that's so in my own educational role, I would say, is the primary impact. We've done a lot of work on social learning, which is a continuation of the concern about the failure of the linear knowledge transfer model. I did a lot of work in participatory development, participation work. We know how to do participation, but unless the products of participatory work are institutionalized, all you do is leave people with the experience of being participated and nothing changes. So we thought participation was necessary but never sufficient, and moved on to social learning, which we understand as a process in which people come together, explore and construct an issue of concern, and in the process generate changes in understanding and changes in practices, which lead to transformation of the situations they're concerned about. But also we understand it as a duality, as a process and as a thing. Just as the Sydney Symphony Orchestra is a group of people who come together to create a performance, but they are also an orchestra which the state government puts money into. So it's a thing as well as a process. And we understand social learning as a governance mechanism, a thing as well as a process. And we've elaborated on how that can be undertaken, how it can be conducted. We've still got ways to go into how it can be built into governance systems, which is perhaps what I'll talk about in the next slide. And the last reference here is just an exemplar of how some of this has flowed through into changes in organisation and quasi changes in governance arrangements for biodiversity conservation here in Victoria.
We'll look forward to reading all of these resources. Now, you mentioned the final question. Here it is. Of course, here at the ANU School of Cybernetics, we are busy building a new cybernetics. So we're always interested in what others are thinking about the future of cybernetics too. So the question we posed was, what's one thing you would remove or do differently in creating a new cybernetics for the 21st century?
If there was only one thing I could do, I'd just do. I mean, this is the magic wand question, and of course, magic wands don't exist. I mean, the conversation I wish to pursue and that I'm involved in, as part of an ever unfolding present, is to try and draw people into a conversation about understanding governance in cyber systemic terms. having written a book about this, published in 2020, stuck a bit in the pandemic to only talking about it online rather than person to person. It's very hard to invite people into a conversation where they can think about governance in systemic terms. It's almost as if governance as a system is an overwhelming concept. So if you look at this model here, I mean, one simple way of looking at governance in systemic terms, in terms of how it's currently constructed, is you've got civil society, the state, the judiciary and law, the private sector, and the media floating around somewhere in, it can be in the private sector with News Corporation, or it could be in the state as in the China Daily in China, etc. Now, if you unpack each of these in systemic terms, each of these, you'll find that there are massive systemic problems in each of these arenas of governance, and there are major problems in the dynamics between them. And you can see that there are some really important things that are missing. And the things that we claim that are missing, if you move to the right one, is, of course, what is primarily missing as we enter the human-induced Anthropocene, where we humans are a force of nature changing whole Earth dynamics, is the centrality of our relationship with the biosphere, which I prefer to talk that in the environment. In fact, I feel we fell into a trap in cybersystemic terms when we coined the way or distorted the way in which the environment was understood. We reified the environment as an externality rather than as something that surrounds us, that which surrounds and in which we can never escape. So even now we carry our environment on our back, which is an engagement with the technology and the oxygen we're breathing and whatever is around us. But if we reframe that as the biosphere, then we humans are absolutely dependent on our ongoing relational dynamics with the biosphere. And those particular dynamics are not heading in a particularly good trajectory. And unless we can change that trajectory soon, then life for us and other species is not going to be great. If we look at the current government arrangements in Canberra, we have a Ministry of the Environment, and it's an externality to the Treasury, so it's not central to our governance system. There's a little bit of lip service to well-being starting to come in Treasury, but again, that's not going anywhere fast. The other thing that's missing is the technosphere. I woke up this morning listening to the BBC, and of course everyone's talking about ChatGPT, and there's people giving testimony in the US about the need to bring AI under greater regulatory control. So the whole issue of where technology and how it contributes to the technosphere, which we humans have created, and which in some of its forms like cement and bitumen and everything, has produced a biomass on the surface of the Earth, which is almost as great as what the Earth has created for itself, is all of that has been subject to essentially laissez-faire capitalism in the last 50 to 70 years. And laissez-faire capitalism, in my view, can't continue to dominate how we engage with and realize technology. The third thing that's missing is an adequate means of engaging with social purpose. Now, we're having an interesting experience in Australia at the moment with a referendum coming up about the voice, admitting Indigenous understandings in part to our constitution and other things of that nature. But because a constitution as an institutional arrangement and a referendum are so tricky and vulnerable institutional designs, there's no guarantee that that referendum will pass, and it points to an absolute paucity of institutional arrangements for us to negotiate as citizens our social purpose, and therefore the trajectory we ought to be pursuing. And so these three elements have to, in my view, be added to our governance systems with a lot of institutional innovation, and I mean institutions in the institutional economic sense, rules, norms of the games that we humans create to transform our governance systems. So again, I don't have a magic wand, but that's the conversation I think we ought to be having. We seem to accept, it's remarkable that we have a constitution that's 200 years old. The US has a constitution that's hundreds of years old as well. These are social technologies which we would say were outdated and outmoded. Why do we believe that they shouldn't be reinvented? It's ridiculous, anyhow.
Want more? Check out the snack pack at the link below for bonus content and resources.